Assalamualaikum. So Mr. Ahmed Paul Keeler, he's the author of Rethinking Islam and the West, a new narrative for the age of crises, and introducing the Mizan thesis, which critiques modernity and highlights the thriving Islamic civilization. The second book, A Life's Journey, the story behind the book, explores the evolution of his ideas and experiences from his education during the British Empire to his peace in Islam in the 1970s. Mr. Keeler created significant projects like the 1976 World of Islam Festival in London, and he was a visiting fellow at the University of Cambridge between 2014 to 2023, a distinguished fellow at USIM Malaysia in 2015, and is a professional research associate at SOAS University of London. I'd like to give a warm welcome to Mr. Paul Keeler.
Assalamu alaikum. This is a very frightening experience for me, because I think it came about because some of the segments of my conversations on YouTube, which are much longer conversations, some of the segments on childhood have been taken out and seem to have gone viral. There's one which has been taken, and wonderful little videos of children playing against what I was saying has spawned something like 100 other videos where people are taking it and making these wonderful videos. And it became very clear that the whole question of childhood is now a very major issue. I consider myself, in terms of my poor scholarship in this area, to be an expert. I have done a major amount of field work in this discipline. I was a child for several years. I've been a father of 4 sons, and I'm the grandfather of 9 grandchildren. So I consider myself an authority. But I feel very sure that there are also many authorities in this room. I start with just it's a short piece about childhood. I end with a poem. It's actually the first poem I've ever written, which is a lament for Gaza. My understanding of the crisis in childhood. It happened in Malaysia in 2015. I was a visiting fellow at the University of Islam. It unfolded in stages. Encounters with those of my own generation introduced me to the realization that their childhood had taken place when the traditional kampong way of life was still intact. The kampong can be described as a deeply engaged neighborhood in a town or village. Even today, it still provides the Malay with a profound identity attached to place and community. The mother of a Malaysian student from Cambridge described the intense relationship they had with the natural world, how they knew the animals and birds that inhabited their kampongs, and how their paddy fields existed within the tropical forest. An eminent professor invited me to visit his kampong. He wanted to introduce me to his grandfather. I was surprised, as he was my age, and I deduced that his grandfather must be well over 100 years old. Next day, I was standing in front of a beautifully maintained grave. His grandfather, a revered figure, was surrounded by the graves of numerous relations, and a cousin of the professor was looking after the cemetery. The professor then took me to the family home. A fine wooden house on stilts stood surrounded by an overgrown garden. The family visited the house once a year at Eid. The rest of the year it remained empty. The house was small, and I knew he came from a large family. However, he described to me a happy childhood. Electricity did not arrive until he was 14. He described how they got water from a well in the garden and how the house was oriented to receive the best of the breeze. He related how the tigers and bears loved the durian fruit and how the tigers would sit under the trees waiting for the fruit to fall, and the bears would climb into the branches and knock the ripening fruit to the ground. I asked him why they didn't protect the trees from the animals. He looked at me incredulously and said that there was enough fruit for the wild creatures and themselves. I remembered with shame the beautiful hadith recorded by Bukhari and Muslim. Never does a Muslim plant a tree or cultivate land out of which a bird or a man or a beast eats, but that he is rewarded for it as an act of charity. He then described the games they played and how they swam in the river, which ran past the bottom of their garden. It was my turn to look incredulous. What about the crocodiles, I asked. He answered, they never bothered us. They had their part of the river, and we had ours. They never ventured into our part, and we never ventured into theirs. He went on to describe how the destruction of the rainforests had destroyed the symbiotic relationship between the kampong and the natural world, and how with the pollution of the rivers, only the crocodiles now swam in them. Back in the university, I was asked to visit a class of students studying the social sciences. When I arrived, they had their laptops at the ready. I asked them to close them if I wanted to have a conversation. Mobile phones were then produced, and I requested them to put them away. I began by asking how many of them came from kampongs. All hands shot up. One of them told me there were some 500 members of his kampong. Do you know them all, I asked. No, he said. What about your grandmother? Did she know everyone? Oh, yes, he said, to much laughter in the room. We then discussed the tremendous change that had taken place between their generation and their grandparents' generation. Their grandparents were part of a community, whilst they were wedded through their machines to their peers. They told me that they were studying drug addiction amongst the young. Once again, I expressed incredulity. You have a drug problem in Malaysia? They then described the tremendous challenge they faced as the curse of drug addiction was invading their society. The realization began to dawn on me that the society was educating the young to become addicts, whether their addiction be a computer game which they play incessantly, music that becomes an obsession, or damaging drugs. They were developing addictive personalities. Their way of relating to the world was addictive. How had this transformation of the young been engineered? Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi rajiun. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi rajiun. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi rajiun kept entering my mind. We generally associate this with the passing of our brothers and sisters. But if we are returning to Almighty Allah, we must have come from Him. This explains the hadith recorded by Sulami, that paradise lies beneath the feet of the mother. The barakah of the newborn child is so great that the mother does not move for 40 days as everything is brought to her. For the first 7 years, the child is more with his Lord than with us. The stages through which the child is taken is described in the 99 Beautiful Names of God by Imam al-Ghazali. He shows how each stage is a new creation. He begins with the spirit. And the Most High said, they will ask thee concerning the spirit, say the spirit is by command of my Lord. Surah 17, verse 85. Imam al-Ghazali continues, so the creation of sensory perceptions after creating the spiritual foundation is another creation, while the creation of discernment, which appears after 7 years, is yet another creation, and the creation of reason after 15 years or thereabouts is a further creation. End of quote. For the first 7 years of the child's life, the pure spirit experiences the world directly through the senses. The child exists in the present. There is no past or future. The children play together. They grow through play, a play that is only understood by them. Adults have no part in it. They are there only to ensure the boundaries are not breached. The child's imagination is incredible. They can become princes and pilots. A piece of wood can become a magic sword, a fallen log, a ship sailing the ocean. Their epic plays are accompanied by laughter and tears as their dramas unfold. The older children lead whilst the young follow in their wake, and as they grow older, they become the leaders. By the time they have reached 7, their characters are formed. They have their peer group of friends for life, and all of this has been achieved through play. The parents have had to do nothing but feed, protect, and love them. They are now ready to enter the stage of discernment when their education into the world begins. Up until then, they are long pressed to pray. Though the beautiful hadith about how the Prophet, may peace and blessings be upon him, allowed his children to play. It is related that the beloved was leading his companions in prayer and remained in sujud for several minutes, such that his companions became worried that something must have happened to him. After the prayer was over, they asked him what had occurred. He told them his grandson was jumping backwards and forwards over him, and he did not want to disturb his play. From childhood and play to the age of discernment, when education begins, the child arrives around the age of 14 at the time of rationality, when the bond between apprentice and adult is formed in friendship, so that the great transition from childhood to adulthood can take place. However, we human beings have been renamed. We are now consumers, and we are valued for the scale of our consumption. The first great change to the journey of the child through to adulthood took place in America during the 1950s. The marketeers in Madison Avenue were looking for new opportunities. They saw that the young between 13 and 18 were accumulating money through weekend jobs and generous pocket money. They renamed the adolescents teenagers, and there began the creation of a teenage culture in music, clothes, and sexual behavior. This was the era of Rebel Without a Cause, the famous book turned into a memorable film. Then the marketeers moved on to invent their version of childhood. Plastic toys in garish colors, making funny noises, leaving nothing for the imagination to do, and films that treat the little ones as though they are mentally deficient mesmerize their subjects, who increasingly become dependent on an external stimulus. Now they are wedded to their mobile phones and screens, bored and irritable if not engaged, and what I have called the dialysis of the imagination sets in. Increasingly isolated, only sharing the manufactured imagination with their peers, they are being groomed to become the perfect consumers. Arriving at the age of reason, when the bond with the adult is supposed to take place in order to ease the child through the momentous journey to maturity, rebellion ensues, and the teenagers attempt to create their peer society denied to them in childhood. Seeking to know who they are, they embark on the perilous journey to maturity alone, to the increasing concern and suffering of their parents. Another terrible outcome of the re-engineered childhood began to dawn on me. It was breaking the circle of life. It was destroying the relationship between grandparents and grandchildren, a relationship that was essential to both parties. I was particularly aware of the grandfather's benefit, having reached that stage of life. The saying of Jesus resonated in my mind: "Except ye become as little children, ye shall not enter into the kingdom of heaven." The children have just come from the divine presence. We old ones are at the stage of preparing to return to the divine presence. The companionship of children helps us to re-enter the ever-present and divest ourselves from the dunya. I then introduced the childhood section into my illustrated lecture introducing my Mizan thesis. I was asked to deliver my lecture to a group of Indonesian students who were visiting the university. When I came to the section on childhood, I broke down in tears. It was several minutes before I could continue. And now the tears are flowing every day. We watch the children of Gaza being mutilated and massacred, and the bombs keep falling. We witness the lamentation of the mother cradling her dead baby, and the bombs keep falling. We wonder at the dedication of the doctors and nurses in their bombed-out hospitals, and the bombs keep falling. We see the desperate attempts of citizens and civil defenders using their bare hands to rescue those trapped beneath the rubble, and the bombs keep falling. We listen to the journalists who continue reporting whilst their homes and families are destroyed, and the bombs keep falling. We are amazed at the teachers who continue their lessons in tents as their schools and universities are reduced to rubble, and the bombs keep falling. We are witnesses to the destruction of the olive groves and farmland, and the starving of the Gazans, and the bombs keep falling. Even the dead are not spared, with graves dug up and cemeteries desecrated, and the bombs keep falling. The mosques have been destroyed, but the call to prayer still rings out across Gaza as the faithful lift up their hearts to heaven amidst the rubble, and the bombs keep falling. Gaza may be destroyed, but the indomitable spirit of the Gazans will remain when the bombs stop falling. Thank you very much.